No human is perfect. We don't strive for perfection, we strive for excellence.
Dr. Phil's show is one of the most famous shows where audiences find healing and gain understanding about their mental and emotional issues.
Your physiological stress in your body. I mean, even just taking a moment to breathe deeply at least once a day.
But no one has ever known Dr. Phil to go personally to the scene of the crime, so to speak. In that case, what was different this time? And how bad was the situation that required his personal intervention?
If you want to land on your feet after all this, there are certain things you have to do, and you're going to have to lead your son.
Join us as we discover what happened as Dr. Phil faced the bullied teen. The heartbreaking letter. Dr. Phil McGraw, known for tackling some of life's toughest challenges on his hit television show, is someone we all know would never look away from someone on the verge of a mental breakdown. But when this desperate mom sent in her letter to the television network where Dr. Phil broadcasted his shows, it was so heart-wrenching and emotional that the staff decided to show it to Dr. Phil before making it public. After reading it, Dr. Phil snapped to action immediately. According to the letter, this mom was at her wit's end because she had just caught her son attempting to commit suicide for the 4th time in 2 months, and although he had refused to say a word to her, she suspected he was the victim of bullying attempts at his school. Dr. Phil wasn't just planning to meet the family and offer a few words of advice. He needed to see firsthand what kind of environment could push a young boy to the brink. Then, he did something no one had seen coming. When he announced his visit, the small town lit up. The news spread quickly, sparking conversations at every coffee shop, school gate, and local diner. People had wildly different opinions about what Dr. Phil's arrival meant. For some, he was nothing short of a real-life hero. Parents whose kids had faced similar struggles whispered to one another about how things might finally change with someone like him stepping in. Kids who had spent too many days dodging cruel jokes and crueler classmates wondered if this was the moment things would get better. But not everyone was rolling out the welcome mat. Some locals scoffed at the idea of a celebrity swooping in to fix their problems. They wondered what a guy from Hollywood would know about how they ran their schools, and were very sure his visit would do more harm than good. The school staff, already walking on eggshells, found themselves under even more pressure. Teachers whispered nervously in the hallways, their discomfort increasing with each news headline. The principal was torn between frustration and panic. How had things escalated to this point, and what would it mean for their school? While the town debated, Dr. Phil prepared. His team reached out to gather every detail they could. School policies, records of reported incidents, and even testimonies from parents and students willing to speak. It was clear that this wasn't just about one boy. This was part of a larger problem that had been swept under the rug for far too long. When the day finally came, it felt like the entire town was holding its breath. People lined the streets, their eyes scanning every passing car. The moment Dr. Phil stepped out of his SUV, it felt like the atmosphere had shifted. Some people cheered, thrilled to see someone they'd only known from their TV screens now standing in their town. Others watched silently, their expressions a mix of curiosity and doubt. Dr. Phil did not waste any time with the crowd of onlookers. Instead, he headed straight to the teenage boy's home. Dr. Phil's interaction with the family. When Dr. Phil entered, the exhausted mother didn't break into tears or make dramatic gestures. Instead, she simply began to speak, after greeting him warmly and offering him some coffee. She told him about the first signs, how her once bubbly son had stopped wanting to go to school, and the excuses he began to give. She shared the scary moment when she discovered his first suicide attempt, and how each one that followed seemed like her young son had decided there was nothing for him in this world. Her voice cracked when she described how helpless she felt, knowing something terrible was happening at school but being unable to stop it. Dr. Phil listened intently, his expression steady. This was why he had come, not for the cameras or the headlines, but for the possibility that he could save a mother from losing her son and a young boy from wasting his life. But he didn't end his visit there. From their home, he headed to the school, determined to find out what had gone so terribly wrong. The staff had prepared for his arrival, but no amount of preparation could soften the questions Dr. Phil came armed with. He wanted the truth, what policies were in place, how bullying incidents were handled, and why this boy had slipped through the cracks. The school administrators were defensive, but Dr. Phil wasn't there for polished responses. He pressed them, digging deeper, refusing to let the conversation move away from the hard facts. The town hall meeting that followed was nothing short of electric. Dr. Phil stood in front of a packed auditorium, addressing not just the parents and teachers, but the students as well. And true to his nature, he didn't sugarcoat his word. He let them know that bullying was not a rite of passage, but a slow, deliberate destruction of someone's spirit. For every skeptical glance, there were a dozen nods of agreement. Parents who had stayed quiet for years found themselves speaking up, sharing stories they had buried out of shame or fear. Teens who had suffered in silence finally felt seen. This was the moment the entire town had been waiting for. Dr. Phil, known for his ability to cut through noise and get to the heart of a problem, would finally meet the boy accused of tormenting his peer to the brink of despair. The atmosphere was tense, every seat filled, every eye fixed on the stage where 2 chairs waited under the spotlight. Dr. Phil entered with his usual calm, commanding presence, the kind that immediately quieted a room without a single word. On the stage sat the boy, a wiry teenager whose posture screamed defiance. Arms crossed tightly over his chest, his gaze focused anywhere but on the man now sitting across from him. Without hesitation, Dr. Phil opened the conversation by asking the boy to share his perspective. The teenager mumbled something inaudible, his words lost in the tension of the room. When pressed to explain further, his response was defensive, and he claimed it had all been jokes and that he had meant no harm. Dr. Phil didn't let up, however. He asked the boy to think about what those so-called jokes had meant to the other child. He painted a picture of the boy's life, the isolation, the shame, and the devastating moments that led to 4 suicide attempts. The room was silent as the weight of those words sank in. At first, the boy tried to shrug it off, repeating that he didn't think it was a big deal. But when asked why he felt the need to act this way, his bravado began to crumble. As the boy fumbled for an answer, he admitted something that shifted the tone entirely. Sometimes he felt like no one cared about him either. His father was rarely around, and when he was, he seemed more interested in his phone than in his son. His mother, overwhelmed by her own struggles, often snapped at him without realizing the weight of her words. The boy confessed that for years he had felt like nothing he did mattered, and the anger he carried found its outlet in his behavior at school. That confession hung in the air, exposing a vulnerability he had tried so hard to hide. His arms uncrossed and his shoulders slumped under the weight of his own words. The room seemed to exhale collectively as the boy's tough exterior crumbled. He wiped at his face, trying to hold back tears. Dr. Phil didn't judge or ridicule. Instead, he nodded quietly, understanding the connection between the pain the boy carried and the actions that pain had driven him to take. He gently laid a hand on the boy's shoulders and explained that hurting others wouldn't lessen his own struggles. Instead, it would only spread the pain further. The boy listened, his resistance fading, his gaze finally meeting Dr. Phil's. When asked what he wanted moving forward, the boy admitted that he didn't want to keep going down the same path. He wanted to be better, but Dr. Phil wasn't moved. Not yet. He made it clear that words alone wouldn't be enough. Change required action, accountability, and consistency. The boy nodded, a flicker of determination on his face. For the first time, he was a kid who might have a chance to rewrite his story instead of just the bully. The confrontation between the boys. Then came the next step, the confrontation. The victim, a quiet boy with downcast eyes, was brought onto the stage. He moved hesitantly, clutching a small piece of paper in his hand. His presence alone shifted the dynamic, with the bully visibly uncomfortable as he was faced with the consequences of his actions. Dr. Phil mediated the conversation, creating a space where both teens could speak openly. The victim, voice trembling, began to read from the paper. He described how the bullying had made him feel worthless, scared, like he didn't belong anywhere. He talked about the nights he cried himself to sleep, the mornings he begged his mom not to send him to school, and the times he thought ending it all was the only way to make the pain stop. Tears streamed down his face as he spoke, and soon the bully was crying too. He stammered out an apology, his voice cracking as he admitted he hadn't realized the depth of the harm he had caused. He told the victim that he was sorry, not just for what he did, but for the pain that was now so clear to him. The moment was raw and powerful, and the room seemed to hold its collective breath. Then, something unexpected happened. The victim looked up, his tears slowing, and said he forgave him. It wasn't easy, and it didn't erase the hurt, but it was a first step toward healing for both of them. Dr. Phil, his voice steady, announced that the bully would be starting counseling to address his unresolved pain, and would also complete community service as a way to give back to the very community he had hurt. The victim, meanwhile, would work with a mentor to rebuild his confidence, and Dr. Phil himself offered to guide him through the process. The session ended with Dr. Phil addressing the audience. He spoke about the responsibility of creating environments where children feel safe, both at home and at school. He urged the town to be more vigilant, to look out for warning signs, and to intervene before things became worse. Over the following weeks, the bully began his counseling sessions, slowly unpacking years of pain, and threw himself into community service, repairing the very school where he had once caused so much harm. The victim, with Dr. Phil's mentorship, began to smile again, his confidence returning as he took small but meaningful steps toward healing. 3 months later, he came back, and while addressing the community again, he mentioned the countless letters he had received over the years from parents, just like the one who reached out about her son. For every child whose story was shared, countless others suffered in silence, believing there was no escape from the torment. Dr. Phil also mentioned the need to teach children the values of kindness and accountability from a young age. He encouraged parents and educators to be proactive, to model the behavior they wanted to see.
It's time that we push back against cancel culture. It's time that we push back against intimidation tactics.
And to create spaces where children felt safe sharing their struggles without fear of judgment. He reminded everyone that bullying thrives in silence, and the most powerful tool against it was speaking up. Whether it was intervening when witnessing harmful behavior or supporting initiatives that promote mental health and inclusion, every action mattered. In this video, we'll show why this age-old fascination has become the latest mystery drawing everyone's attention. What are the hidden truths of this ancient mystery? What have the Google searches revealed about it? Let's find out. When we hear about the Nephilim, we think of giants, celestial beings, and a story that blends myth and reality. These mysterious beings have fascinated mythologies, religions, and cultural stories throughout history. The whole concept of the Nephilim has a lot of shocking twists that have made it a subject of perpetual curiosity. The fascination with the Nephilim comes from the many ways people interpret them, creating a rich mix of mythology, theology, and ancient stories. The interest in understanding Nephilim hasn't faded over time. In fact, it's been revitalized in the digital era. More online searches indicate a renewed curiosity about these mysterious beings, leading to a modern exploration of long-standing questions. Whether viewed through a religious lens or approached as a symbolic representation, the mystery of the Nephilim continues to intrigue and inspire curiosity across different intellectual and creative domains. Before we dive deeper and find out why this ancient term has become the focus of our collective online curiosity, let's talk about what the Nephilim means. The Nephilim is a term mentioned in ancient texts that holds a mysterious place in various religious and mythological traditions. The concept of the Nephilim appears in sources such as the Hebrew Bible, specifically in the book of Genesis. It has sparked many interpretations and debates among scholars, theologians, and enthusiasts. In the biblical narrative, the Nephilim are described as the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men. This intriguing passage in Genesis chapter 6, verses 1-4, has been a source of fascination and speculation for centuries. The identity of the sons of God and the nature of their union with human women are subjects of much debate. Some interpret the sons of God as fallen angels or divine beings, while others see them as representatives of a righteous lineage. The term Nephilim is believed to be derived from the Hebrew root NPL, meaning to fall or fallen ones, adding an ominous and supernatural element to these beings. The text suggests a connection between the presence of the Nephilim and the wickedness of humanity, leading to divine intervention through the Great Flood. While the biblical account provides a foundation for understanding the Nephilim, various ancient texts and traditions outside the Judeo-Christian context offer alternative perspectives. In some Mesopotamian myths, there are stories of divine beings intermingling with humans, resulting in hybrid beings with extraordinary abilities. This parallel has led scholars to explore potential cultural exchanges and influences among ancient civilizations. In specific apocryphal and pseudepigraphic texts, the Nephilim are elaborated upon, portraying them as giants or superhuman entities with a significant impact on human history. The Book of Enoch, an ancient Jewish work, goes into greater detail about the Nephilim, describing them as giants who consume the earth's resources and engage in destructive behavior. The way people understand the Nephilim isn't just limited to ancient texts. It also influenced modern culture. In literature, movies, and art, the Nephilim often blend divine and human aspects. They embody the tension between the celestial and earthly realms, challenging human perceptions of identity and existence. Some scholars approach the Nephilim narrative as symbolic rather than literal, interpreting it as an allegory for the consequences of moral corruption or the clash between different societal groups. This symbolic interpretation allows for a more nuanced understanding that transcends the boundaries of religious dogma. Archaeologist George Ernest Wright suggests that the concept of Nephilim, mainly as giants, may have originated from the Hebrews' observations of Transjordian megalithic structures and the robust walls of Canaanite cities, some reaching 18 feet in thickness. Wright also points out that ancient tribal people were generally short before and after 3000 BCE, with no evidence supporting abnormally sized aborigines. On the contrary, biblical professor Brian R. Doak proposes that Nephilim lore serves as a polemic against epic and heroic tropes present in cultures akin to the Hebrews. J.C. Greenfield similarly associates Nephilim lore with the negative aspects of the Apkallu tradition in Sumerian mythology, where Apkallu were revered for their exceptional wisdom. The Anakites, linked to the Nephilim, find mention in the Egyptian execration texts of the Middle Kingdom, which was from 2055 to 1650 BC, as adversaries of Egypt and Canaan. Now that we're familiar with what the Nephilim is, let's do a deep dive into its history in the Hebrew Bible and Judeo-Christian religion. Based on the Google searches, what is the Judeo-Christian origin of the Nephilim? Is it still relevant in Christianity today? In the Hebrew Bible, there are 3 interconnected passages mentioning the Nephilim, with 2 originating from the Pentateuch. The initial occurrence appears in Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 to 4, preceding the Noah's Ark narrative. While the Jewish Publication Society's translation transliterates Nephilim as Nephilim, the King James Version interprets it as giants. The complexity of the Nephilim's nature arises from the ambiguity in Genesis chapter 6, verse 4, leaving it uncertain whether they are the sons of God or their offspring, referred to as the mighty men of old, men of renown. Some, like Richard Hess and P.W. Coxon, interpret them as the offspring. The second reference is in Numbers chapter 13, verses 32 to 33, where 10 of the 12 spies describe the Anakites, a Rephite tribe, as descendants of the Nephilim. Beyond the Pentateuch, another passage indirectly mentions the Nephilim in Ezekiel chapter 32, verses 17 to 32. Of particular significance is Ezekiel chapter 32, verse 27, featuring a phrase with disputed meaning. With traditional vowels added in the medieval period, it reads as Geborim Noflim, which means fallen warriors or fallen Geborim. In contrast, some scholars read it as Geborim Nephilim, which means Nephilim warriors or warriors Nephilim. Ronald S. Hendel interprets it as warriors the Nephilim, referencing Genesis 6:4. Brian R. Doak proposes reading it as the Hebrew verb fallen, not using the specific term Nephilim, yet still making an apparent reference to the Nephilim tradition found in Genesis. The earliest translations of the Hebrew Bible, such as the Septuagint from the 3rd or 2nd century BCE, translate the term Nephilim as gigantes. In Greek mythology, gigantes were assertive and aggressive beings, not necessarily of great size. This choice by the Greek translators was later adopted into the Latin Vulgate, compiled in the 4th or 5th century CE, using the transcription of the Greek term instead of the literal translation of the Hebrew word Nephilim. This tradition of giant progeny from the union of the sons of God and the daughters of men continued in later medieval Bible translations. The decision to render Nephilim as gigantes by the Greek translators is quite unique. Nephilim in Hebrew literally means the fallen ones, with a strict Greek translation being peptokotes, as seen in the Septuagint of Ezekiel chapter 32, verses 22 to 27. The authors of the Septuagint aimed not only to translate the foreign term into Greek, but also to use a term understandable and meaningful for their Hellenistic audiences. Recognizing the complex meaning of Nephilim emerging from interconnected biblical passages, the Greek translators noted similarities with gigantes. Both had ambiguous identities as a blend of the human and divine, evoking fascination and moral contempt. They were portrayed as embodying chaotic qualities and posing a significant threat to gods and humans. Additionally, both gigantes and Nephilim were linked to the underworld, originating from the earth and ultimately confined therein. In the book of 1 Enoch, the giants are described as great giants, whose height was 300 cubits, equivalent to 450 feet, based on a cubit being 18 inches. The Quran mentions the people of Ad in Quran chapter 26, verse 130, described by the prophet Hud as resembling Jabarim, which in Hebrew is Gibborim, likely a reference to the biblical Nephilim. These people of Ad are depicted as giants, with the tallest among them reaching 100 feet. According to Islamic legend, the Ad were not wiped out by the flood because some were too tall to drown. Instead, God destroyed them after they rejected warnings, banishing them to the lower layers of hell after death. Early sources consistently identify the sons of heaven as angels. From the 3rd century BCE onward, various texts, including Enochic literature, the Dead Sea Scrolls, Jubilees, Testament of Reuben, 2 Baruch, Josephus, and the books of Jude and the 2nd book of Peter, refer to these beings. For instance, in the 2nd verse of the 7th chapter in the 1st book of Enoch, there is a description of how the angels, sons of heaven, were enamored with human women and chose wives from them to bear children. Some Christian apologists, like Tertullian and Lactantius, share this view. The earliest explicit interpretation of angelic beings mating with humans can be traced to the rabbinical Targum Pseudo-Jonathan, gaining traction in modern Christian commentaries. This interpretation is supported by the parallelism in Genesis chapter 6, verse 4, where the sons of God, referred to as divine nature, are contrasted with the daughters of men, referred to as human nature, suggesting the sons of God are superhuman beings. The commentary in the New American Bible draws a connection between the Epistle of Jude and the Genesis narrative, proposing that the epistle implicitly alludes to the Nephilim's paternity as heavenly beings who descended to earth and engaged in relations with women. According to footnotes in the Jerusalem Bible, the biblical author may have intended the Nephilim to represent a superhuman race, where superhuman stands for the extreme wickedness attributed to them. Some Christian commentators challenge this interpretation, pointing to Jesus' statement that angels do not marry. However, opposing views argue that Jesus, in comparing angels to men, implies the former's capacity for sexual activity. Additionally, angels are not explicitly described as incapable of marriage, akin to voluntary celibacy. Support for the fallen angels interpretation includes using the phrase, the sons of God, outside Genesis chapter 6, notably in the book of Job, specifically in chapter 1 verse 6 and chapter 2 verse 1, where it explicitly refers to angels. In Genesis chapter 6 verse 2, the Septuagint manuscript Codex Alexandrinus renders this phrase as the angels of God, while Codex Vaticanus reads sons. A contemporary perspective aligning with the fallen angel interpretation suggests that Nephilim are the offspring of demon-possessed men and godly women. This creation is seen as a satanic attempt to render humanity unsuitable for producing the Messiah. But that's not all. The narrative of the Nephilim is also extensively detailed in the book of Enoch. The Greek, Aramaic, and primary Ge'ez manuscripts of the first book of Enoch and Jubilees, discovered in the 19th century and housed in the British Museum and Vatican Library, link the Nephilim's origin to fallen angels, particularly the Egregoroi, which means watchers. Samyaza, a high-ranking angel, is depicted as leading a rebellious group of angels in a descent to Earth to engage in sexual relations with human females. According to this tradition, the offspring of the Nephilim are known as the Eliud, considered a separate race from the Nephilim but sharing their fate. Some argue that the fallen angels responsible for the Nephilim were cast into Tartarus, as mentioned in 2 Peter chapter 2 verse 4 and Jude chapter 1 verse 6, described as a place of total darkness. One interpretation suggests that God allowed 10% of the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim to persist as demons after the flood, attempting to lead humanity astray until the final judgment. Dr. Michael Heiser, an Old Testament scholar, proposes a similar view in his book The Unseen Realm, suggesting that the spirits of the Nephilim became what is now known as demons or unclean spirits, in addition to Enoch. The Book of Jubilees chapter 7, verses 21 to 25 posits that eliminating these Nephilim was one of God's objectives in flooding the earth during Noah's time, portraying them as evil giants. The New Testament's Epistle of Jude, chapters 14 to 15, references the first book of Enoch, chapter 1 verse 9, widely believed to be based on Deuteronomy, chapter 33 verse 2. Most commentators see this as an endorsement of the Enochic interpretations of Genesis 6 by the author of Jude, though some have raised questions about this perspective. Now, we've established that the Nephilim originated from the Hebrew Bible. But are there other origins and interpretations of this mysterious concept? Wait until you see what we discovered. Have there been other interpretations of the Nephilim? What cultures and religions do these interpretations come from? From the 2nd century CE onward, both Christian and Jewish sources reference the notion of the offspring of Seth rebelling against God and mingling with the daughters of Cain. This perspective is articulated by figures such as Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, Augustine of Hippo, Sextus Julius Africanus, and the letters attributed to Saint Clement. The Amharic Ethiopian Orthodox Bible, considered canonical in modern times, also echoes this view in Enoch chapter 2, 1-3, where the offspring of Seth expresses affection for the daughters of Cain and decides to bear children with them. Orthodox Judaism opposes the idea that Genesis 6 refers to angels or their ability to intermarry with humans. Shimon bar Yochai even cursed those teaching this notion, a sentiment followed by Rashi and Nachmanides. Pseudo-philo-biblical antiquities may imply that the sons of God were human. Consequently, most Jewish commentaries and translations depict the Nephilim as the offspring of sons of nobles, rather than sons of God or sons of angels. This rendering is also suggested in the Targum on Kalos, Symmachus, and the Samaritan Targum, which use phrases like sons of the rulers and sons of the judges. A long-standing belief among some Christians is that the sons of God were originally righteous descendants of Seth, who rebelled. At the same time, the daughters of men were the unrighteous descendants of Cain, resulting in the Nephilim as the offspring of their union. This view, present in Jewish literature from the 1st century CE and Christian sources from the 3rd century or earlier, is found in various texts, including the Clementine literature, Sextus Julius Africanus, Ephraim the Syrian, and others. Some individuals and groups, such as St. Augustine, John Chrysostom, and John Calvin, interpret Genesis chapter 6 verse 2 as suggesting that the angels who fathered the Nephilim were actually certain human males from the lineage of Seth. According to this perspective, these men were called sons of God, likely due to their previous covenant with Yahweh. These sources argue that these men, however, became preoccupied with earthly desires and married the daughters of men, referring to those descended from Cain or any people who did not worship God. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church holds a similar view, supported by their Ge'ez manuscripts and Amharic translations of the Haile Selassie Bible. In these versions, which differ from Western academic editions, the books of 1st Enoch and Jubilees are considered canonical. The Sons of Seth view is also presented in a few extra-biblical but ancient works, including the Clementine literature. the 3 RD century Cave of Treasures, and the 6th century Ge'ez work, The Conflict of Adam and Eve with Satan. These sources describe the offspring of Seth as disobeying God by intermingling with the Cainites, producing wicked children who incited God's anger and led to the deluge. Other cultures, besides the ones we already talked about, also have their versions of what Nephilim is. For example, in Aramaic culture, the term Nephilim is associated with the offspring of Orion in mythology. But the Brown Driver Briggs lexicon considers this origin uncertain and risky. In Arab pagan beliefs, fallen angels were thought to be sent to Earth as men. Some of these angels were believed to have engaged in relationships with humans, giving rise to hybrid children. According to Al-Jahiz, there was a widespread belief that Abu Jurham, the ancestor of the Jurham tribe, was the son of a disobedient angel and a human woman. Thanks for watching. Please hit the like button, let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and don't forget to share with your friends. To enjoy more informative videos like this, please subscribe to the channel.